Welcome to the show, everyone. If you look back at how authoritarian states controlled information in the 20th century, the playbook was relatively straightforward. You seized the television towers, you printed the state-approved newspapers, and you jammed foreign radio signals. But today, the machinery of information control has evolved into something far more subtle, and honestly, far more pervasive. We are seeing a shift from overt state-run media to the quiet manipulation of algorithms, search engines, and conversational AI.
Spot on. It's not about some loud, blaring propaganda broadcast anymore, is it? It's about what happens when you type a question into a search bar or ask a smart speaker a simple question while you're cooking dinner. And the prime case study for this is Yandex. For over 20 years, Yandex was basically the Google of the Russian-speaking world. A massive tech success story, an ecosystem with everything from maps and cloud storage to food delivery and their own AI assistant named Alice. But the Kremlin saw that influence and slowly, systematically, turned it into an instrument of state censorship.
And that pressure didn't start overnight. It goes back to 2008, right after the invasion of Georgia, when government officials literally walked into Yandex's offices demanding that search results and front-page news headlines reflect the Kremlin's narrative. Over the years, the company surrendered its independence piece by piece. But the absolute tipping point was the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Just days after it began, the head of Yandex News resigned in protest, calling the company a key element in concealing information about the war.
And the proof of that concealment is incredibly stark. Take a search for Bucha 2 months after the invasion. We all saw the horrific images of civilian casualties left on the streets. But if you searched Bucha on Yandex back then, what did you get? Postcard-perfect, pre-war photos of a quiet Kiev suburb. No bodies, no destroyed tanks, no war. Just a completely sterilized, artificial reality. And then, Yandex's founder, Arkady Volozh, who was hit with EU sanctions, stepped down and the company was eventually sold to VK, which is controlled by Yuri Kovalchuk, a very close ally of Vladimir Putin.
This means Yandex is now fully integrated into the state's ideological apparatus. And this isn't just about search results anymore. It's about generative AI. A rigorous study conducted in 2026 by Ihor Samokodsky, founder of Policy Genome, tested 6 leading AI models on questions related to documented war crimes. When they asked Yandex's AI assistant Alice about the Bucha massacre in Russian, the bot endorsed Kremlin propaganda 86% of the time, claiming the massacre was staged and that Ukraine is run by Nazis.
86%? That is an astronomical bias. But what's even wilder is what happened when they asked Alice the exact same question in English. The bot just flat-out refused to answer. The researchers actually caught this on video. The AI started generating a factually accurate response in English, saying, "No, there is no convincing evidence that Ukraine organized mass killings in Bucha." But then, boom, a hard-coded refusal mechanism instantly overwrote it with, "There are topics where I might be wrong. It's better to keep quiet."
That shows a deliberate, politically motivated override. The underlying language model actually knew the truth, but the system architecture forced a gag order. And this isn't just an internal Russian issue. Millions of people outside of Russia use Yandex. Its browser has over 71 million monthly active users. It commands over 34% of the browser market in Belarus, nearly 29% in Kazakhstan, and even holds onto a noticeable slice of the market in EU countries like Latvia and Estonia.
And that's the real kicker, isn't it? People who would never dream of turning on Russian state television are buying these smart speakers or downloading the browser just to listen to music or let their kids play audiobooks in Russian. They don't realize they've brought an active Kremlin filtering machine right into their living rooms. It's a highly polished, convenient digital utility acting as a delivery vehicle for state-sponsored disinformation.
This digital control network doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's designed to push very specific geopolitical narratives. And one of the most common tactics we see is what psychologists call inversion, where the actual aggressor portrays themselves as the victim to justify their own hostile actions. We're seeing this play out right now in the Baltic region and along the Ukrainian-Belarusian border.
Yeah, the Russia under threat from the West routine. It's classic. Look at how pro-Kremlin outlets, including the Polish-language branch of the Pravda network, framed the NATO military exercise Gallant Boar 2026. They claimed this exercise was actually a thinly veiled preparation for a NATO invasion of Kaliningrad, the highly militarized Russian exclave on the Baltic Sea.
Which is a complete fabrication. The Lithuanian armed forces have been completely transparent about this. Gallant Boar 2026 is a purely defensive drill. It's designed to train Lithuanian, Polish and French forces to defend the Suwalki Gap. That is the narrow 60-mile corridor of land connecting Poland and Lithuania, sandwiched right between Belarus and Kaliningrad. If anything, NATO's presence there is a direct defensive response to Russia's own aggressive posture. Its cyber attacks, GPS jamming, and sabotage of critical Baltic infrastructure.
Exactly. Russia builds up its military, causes GPS disruption for commercial flights, and then screams aggression when NATO practices defending its own members. And we see the exact same script flipped with Belarus. State-controlled outlets like RT have been pushing this line that Ukraine is desperately trying to provoke Belarus into a war to distract from its own domestic issues.
It completely ignores the physical reality on the ground. Belarus has been actively constructing artillery positions and building military roads leading directly to the Ukrainian border since April 2026. And let's not forget the historical context. Since February 2022, Belarus has acted as a primary staging ground for Russian forces, serving as a launch pad for the initial assault on Kyiv and hosting Russian missiles, drones and aircraft. The idea that Ukraine is the one seeking to expand the conflict is absurd when Belarus is already deeply complicit in the invasion.
It's the ultimate gaslighting tactic. By painting Ukraine and NATO as the warmongers, the Kremlin tries to convince its domestic audience and its allies that their own aggressive military build-ups are just necessary defensive measures. If you can convince people you're about to be invaded, you can get away with almost any level of mobilization.
But the Kremlin's tactics aren't limited to military narratives. They are highly adept at exploiting internal, domestic issues within European countries to breed resentment and weaken democratic institutions. They take standard administrative processes and spin them into grand conspiracies of Western oppression.
Yeah, like what they did with Bulgaria. The European Commission recently opened an excessive deficit procedure against Bulgaria because their budget deficit was projected to hit 7.4% of GDP, which is way over the EU's 3% limit. Now, to anyone who understands how the EU works, this is standard fiscal monitoring. The Commission also raised concerns about Germany, Estonia, Latvia and Slovenia. But how did pro-Kremlin outlets like Sputnik Mundo paint it?
They framed it as financial revenge by Brussels because it doesn't like Bulgaria's government. It's a calculated effort to portray the EU as an authoritarian, punitive bloc that uses funds to bully sovereign nations. It's incredibly cynical because it projects Russia's own style of political coercion onto European institutions, essentially telling audiences, look, everyone does it. The West is just as corrupt.
And they use that exact same defense of sovereignty angle to exploit deep-seated cultural and religious values. We saw a massive push of this in Armenia right before their parliamentary elections. Russian intelligence services, specifically the SVR, claimed the EU was aggressively trying to push the Russian Orthodox Church out of Armenia.
This was quickly picked up and amplified by TASS and local pro-Kremlin outlets in Armenia. But if you look at the actual agreements between the EU and Armenia, there is absolutely nothing in there regarding religious affiliation. The EU operates on a framework of secular neutrality and freedom of religion. Furthermore, Armenian law explicitly mandates the separation of church and state. The narrative was purely manufactured to present Armenia's integration with Europe as an existential threat to its identity and spiritual sovereignty.
It's about finding the cracks in a society and driving a wedge into them. If it's not the economy, it's religion. Anything to keep these nations unstable and distrustful of democratic alliances.
This brings us to the final piece of the strategy: delegitimizing international law and security frameworks. When Russia commits clear violations of international rules, its propaganda machine immediately goes on the offensive to muddy the waters, turn physical evidence into a debate, and frame legal enforcement as illegal aggression.
A prime example is the recent drone incident in Romania. A Russian Geran 2 drone, which is the Russian designation for the Iranian-designed Shahid, crashed onto Romanian territory, which is NATO soil. The Romanian authorities and NATO analyzed the wreckage and unequivocally identified it. But pro-Kremlin outlets, again using RT as a megaphone, claimed that NATO and the EU manufactured the entire incident as a false flag to justify militarization and drag Romania into a war.
It's a complete inversion of responsibility. A Russian drone violates the airspace of a sovereign nation, and when that nation takes defensive measures, it's accused of warmongering. We see a parallel tactic at sea with how Russia handles the enforcement of maritime sanctions. Recently, the French Navy lawfully intercepted an oil tanker named the Tagore under suspicion of sanctions evasion and operating under a false flag. The Tagore is part of Russia's shadow fleet. This unregistered, poorly maintained network of vessels used to smuggle Russian oil, which funds the war effort and poses a massive ecological risk to European waters.
Right, but according to RT's Arabic language service, this legal maritime enforcement wasn't a sanctions check. They called it international piracy by France. It's a deliberate attempt to erode the legitimacy of the rules-based order. If they can make legal enforcement look like lawless piracy, they can justify ignoring international law altogether.
It relies on the classic propaganda technique of repeating a falsehood so frequently and across so many different languages and regions that it begins to feel like a legitimate alternative viewpoint. By analysing these campaigns collectively, we can see they are not isolated stories. They are part of a coordinated global effort of foreign information manipulation and interference.
And that's why we have to look at the patterns, not just the individual lies. Whether it's an AI assistant quietly hiding the truth about war crimes, or state media claiming a defensive military drill is an invasion plan, the objective is always the same: to erode trust, invert reality, and make the truth feel entirely subjective. Recognizing these tactics is the first and most crucial step in disarming them.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll be back next week to unpack more of the hidden forces shaping our digital world. Until then, stay vigilant and keep questioning the feed.